And we did that. Medical side of things?
Well, we have looked at a variety of different concerns, and I think that we are appropriately being tasked with looking at labeling, and this gets into a very, it's every aspect of the industry, from tracking components, tracking plant, tracking raw materials that go into MIPS, eggs, for example. We're as Matt said, we're tasked now with patient safety and with being able to, in the event something happens, go back and follow the trail of contaminants, potentially. Now, this really goes into three areas. The growing, which covers, for example, hydroponics and heavy metal contamination, fertilizers. What is the definition of organic, and who would oversee the compliance with regulations or the status of what is organic and what is not? Adulterants, I used that term before. Those would be things like what Bruce raised, the question of powdery mildew, spider mites, any other problems that might afflict a particular grow operation, pesticides, things that are either commonly used throughout agriculture or specific to the cultivation of marijuana. Those are things where we need a lot of input from you all. What happens to these things when they're heated or burned? Those are things that we will, that's information that we will be gathering from poison control centers and academic institutions and potentially the CDC. When you look at labeling, there would be standards of shelf life, where we need input from you. And that's the variety of products, from tinctures to candies to ice cream. And there will, I think the labeling issue, and this would be subject to your input, but it would have a used or best if used by kind of date. We want to look at topicals. For example, is DMSO allowable in a topical cannabis extract? That's an aspect that we will be exploring. And I have seen topicals that do have DMSO in them. Is this something that we need to be concerned with? We would certainly like to have your input on this. Temperatures at which to bake. We want to preserve the active components of the cannabis that's in the baked good, but we also want to be able to ensure that any potential contaminants, bacteria in this particular case, are killed, or spores of something that we need to be concerned about. And with regard to active component testing, this is another thing that, of course, has been raised in other discussions, but the patients probably need to know how much THC there is in their particular ingestible or consumable. How many grams or milligrams of CBD? Are there other things in there that they need to know about? Who bears the cost of that? This is something that came up in terms of other contaminants, particularly biocontaminants like pests, mites, fungus, molds. Should products be randomly tested? And if so, cultures taken? And if so, who bears the cost of that? Is this an area where perhaps a state lab could be engaged with the testing of this? And what are the legalities of that with regard to federal law or federal licensing of laboratories? Those are issues that I think in our discussions, Dr. Bregman raised this question of how does that affect a laboratory's ability to do federal testing? Would it be appropriate to tap into funds either from CDPHE from patient application fees or funds derived from licensing fees within the DOR if we elect to have mandatory product testing or spot testing? A DOR agent might or officer might come in and say, okay, today we're going to take small samples of your product line, be it whatever it is, and this is now going to be tested. would that lead, and this is a question for you all, would that lead to increased compliance with avoiding putting that product that's got mites in it or powdery mold on the shelf? Just by virtue of the potential of being tested, or knowing that ultimately there will be a random test done. Those are things where we certainly need your input. We would like to have a list of commonly used fertilizers, commonly used pest control substances, anything that you, or perhaps those things that are uncommonly used. Those would be extraordinarily helpful, coming from the growers, coming also from MIPS producers, so that we would understand better and have a basis on which to go to these other agencies like the CDPHE and the CDC and the Poison Control Centers. There are also, I think we'll touch on, we've discussed allergies, such as peanuts. You know, you've seen those contain peanuts. I think the pharmacy code idea is a brilliant one. You can't put a label on a truffle, but you can actually have a paper that details what's in there that goes along with that particular product. It's not a very costly thing to do. It's just a question of determining and making sure that, in fact, what you say is in there, or there's not something in there that you didn't label. As with things like this most recent bacterial contamination of eggs, in the event something happens, it's going to be very important for the local health department or the state health department to be able to go from that patient to that production facility to that raw materials supplier. And it may be a raw materials supplier of eggs from Iowa that went into that brownie. So, and we were discussing whether or not, we want to certainly, as in everybody else's interest, avoid tasking small centers, MIPS folks, large centers, anybody with onerous requirements for keeping track of things. But your input will be important to determine what is onerous, what isn't, what's doable, what's not, what's cost effective, what's going to be an excessively burdensome activity. Anything else?
The last thing is another point is that we talked about was the education of the workers.
Yes.
With regards to just them not being neophytes, then there's a certain number of hours that may be a 2-hour course or something like that that they come through, that they can pick up the biggest of the big, you know, with regards to things like that. But the bottom line, again, is making it workable and not making it more complicated than it has to be.
And just one other thing is handling of product. Do you use chopsticks, tongs, gloves? What's appropriate? When you're dispensing either the organic botanical marijuana or an edible product, an infused product. This is a big area that certainly given the information, we will be able to come up with suggestions anyway. Your input again on those will be required and important. But ultimately it's the safety of that person who's going to be using it that is uppermost and the most important consideration. All these other things feed into that. And of course, again, we want to make sure that it's affordable ultimately. So that hopefully these are not onerous added costs.
And I don't think by doing this, we are beginning, the process needs to be coming back from the patients to know how they're doing with the product that they're dealing with, and to get it out from the darkness into the light so that we can now have the dialogue of saying, well, you use this product, are there any side effects? Are there any reportable thing? Well, if you get 4 or 5 cases of something coming up, then the flags go off, and we know where to start looking and going on from there. None of that is in place with regards, but it's all under this sort of heading.
The other thing that I think needs to be mentioned is, when we touched on this, is waste product handling. You're absolutely correct. What impact does any of this have on the worker in the grow, or the environment in general? Can you just take your hydro waste and dump it into the sewer? I don't think so. But we do need that input on these sorts of things. And what would you do with used soil? Are you going to recompost, or if you're growing organically, or what constitutes organic?
I would just say, when I went and got my CO, I went to the wastewater department, gave them a complete list of all of the nutrients